Welcome to Real Talk with Tamara. On today's show, I will be speaking with Valencia Harris and Mr. Richard Harris. They called in from Washington, D.C. to give an update on her daughter, Unique Harris. Unique went missing October 10th of 2010. That was 6 years ago. That's going on 6 years. And when she went, the circumstances are completely suspicious. And her mother has worked relentlessly and nonstop to get out there her daughter's disappearance. That's the reason her and her father called in from Washington, D.C. to speak about the updates, because she's been on Real Talk with Tamara one time before. Unique has 2 small children that needs their mother. So thanks for calling in, Valencia and Mr. Harris.
You're welcome.
So how have you been?
You're welcome.
How have you been, Miss Valencia?
Well, you know me. I'm still just out here looking for my baby and doing the best that I can. But thank you for having us on your show again. In reference to Unique, you are one of my most avid supporters when it comes to Unique situations. So I'm blessed, sweetheart. I'm blessed.
Yeah. Now, for my audience that may not remember, kind of give them an update about Unique's case and why it's suspicious to you that she's missing.
Well, first of all, my daughter was taken out of her apartment in the middle of the night while my 2 grandsons were sleeping. Apparently, someone came into her apartment, took her out on October the 10th, 2010, sometime between the hours of 3 a.m. and 9 a.m. when the children awoke the next morning, and she has not been seen or heard from since.
Wow, and you said that she was taken out of her apartment. What makes you believe that she was taken?
Well, first of all, Unique's eyeglasses were left when she would normally have them when she lay down to go to sleep on her pillow. That is where my dad found her glasses when he went over to investigate and see what was going on when she was unaccounted for. So that was a definite, and still to this day is a definite red flag for me, because, you know, my daughter couldn't see a good 5 or 10 feet in front of her without her glasses. So why would she leave, you know, of her own volition and not even be able to see where she was going?
Right. Now, Mr. Harris, Unique is your granddaughter. Do you think that her being missing for almost 6 years, is it suspicious to you also?
Yes, it is. It is suspicious to me also.
And why is that?
I want you to know I was a little sick here at the early part of the first of this year. Yeah. But I've come back a whole lot to what I've been compared to business.
Okay, and you said you were sick the earlier part of this year, and could a lot of that have a lot to do with not, you know, your now how close were you to your granddaughter?
Well, I was real close to her because I was more or less like a father figure to her. And you know, just about everything she did, she was always confined to me to get the okay, and she always did that.
Exactly. Like I told you earlier on, Tamara, my dad and myself tried to talk Unique out of moving into this complex.
Correct.
Now, Valencia, tell me about the complex, because I know you talk about that complex a whole lot. You feel very, very strongly about that area. Kind of tell my audience about what you talked to Unique about and why you felt so strongly about that complex.
I went over to the complex prior to Unique moving into that complex, and you know, everybody has to keep in mind that Unique only lived in this apartment for 5 weeks before she was taken. When me and my dad had to move her belongings out after the police released her apartment, as far as having any evidentiary value, Unique still had boxes that were packed. But, you know, back to what I was saying, you know, before Unique even moved into that apartment, I went over myself on a day after I had gotten off work when she told me she had gotten an apartment in this complex. And I went over there just to get a feel and to see where her and my grandsons would be staying. Because, that time they were still staying with me. She had just recently moved back to D.C. in June of 2010. So, of course, the parents are going to know where their children are and what type of environment they're going to be in, what type of environment their grandchildren, and, from my dad's point of view, his great-grandchildren. We wanted to know what type of environment it was. I went over, I checked this apartment complex out, and what I saw when I was out there in broad daylight was just, you would have all kinds of, illicit things going on out there. You have, drug deals going on out there, fights going on out there. It's just an unsavory and unsafe environment, as we all can see right now. Apparently, me and my dad's opinion of the complex was right on point.
All right.
Wow.
And I asked my daughter to call me back, and she had called me back and give me her status of how she had felt about the apartment. She didn't like it either. So, like as she said, neither one of us feel like this way. We tried to get her not to move, but she just bent over. I hope that she had to have that place.
Why do you all think she was so adamant about moving there?
Well, I'll definitely say, first and foremost, I think, I raised Jimmy to be a fairly independent woman.
And she was.
And she wanted to have her own. She was my child that didn't come to me for things, even when she needed things. Unique was, very, very, tenacious about her independence and being an independent mom with her boys and raising her boys, in her own environment that she had, destined for them. So I think, I think I raised her to be a little bit too independent, because she really gave me and my dad a fit as far as she was just determined to move there. Now, I'm not even sure where she got the information on this apartment from. All I knew was that, she had gotten the apartment, and, the whole situation of her even moving into this apartment was kind of suspicious to me, because in the beginning, they were trying to put her in a unit that it was only one unit in that area, and the laundry room was directly across the hall from her, and it was a ground level apartment. With me seeing the complex and knowing what I knew and what I saw of the apartment, I was very adamant with her. No. You and these children are not going to move in this apartment where there are only you and these children in here and no one else, as far as a next door neighbor or downstairs neighbor. There was no more, other safety nets for her. So I believe it was probably about a few days to a week later, she came back, after, that time frame of going back and forth with the apartment complex management, and told me that they had found her an apartment on the top floor of the building where there were other, units and other people and more coming and going, as far as people were concerned. So at that point, seeing that she was so adamant and that she had at least tried to alleviate my concern as far as that lower level apartment with her apartment and the laundry room being the only, places in this particular section of the building, I guess she figured, she had alleviated that concern of mine. So at that point, she went full steam ahead with this top floor apartment. Me and my dad were still not comfortable with it, but I mean, at 24 years old, it's not too much that you can tell a 24-year-old, that they, are compelled to listen to.
Right. Now, Mr. Harris, you stated that you speak with, and I'm going to get back to the apartments in just a few minutes, but Mr. Harris, you stated that you spoke with Unique every day. Before she went missing, when had you spoken to her prior?
Say that again, sis. I'm sorry.
Prior to her going missing, when was the last time you had spoken to her?
Well, in other words, that particular Friday night, she told me, she said, "There is a man, the boys going back over to their apartment." And matter of fact, I was up there at the time, with my daughter. And I said, "But no, you're not gonna catch a bus. I'm gonna take you back home." So I took her and the boys back home that same particular night. I called the boys that Saturday night, and me and the boys talked. And the woman I called, first thing she said, "I know you want to talk to Richard and Andre." I said, "Yes, let me talk to Richard and Andre." So I talked to them. They were both off the wall. And I guess it was about 8 o'clock, I guess. I'm not sure what time it was. And the next morning, I was over there to my daughter, because I stayed to my daughter's house the next morning. We were trying to nourish her back to him, but she had a broken ankle. And so I stayed there with her. So the next morning, or the next day, this is when I discovered that Nick was missing. Because wasn't it one of the kids or somebody had called, because it was sitting at the time that they had called their damn told.
Yeah, it was Talea's mom, my granny.
Talea.
She had called her mom. Yeah, she had called her mom, and her mom had called me. Because, like my dad said, we spoke to Unique the night before, and that's the night that everything seemed like it was okay.
It was okay.
There, enjoying the boys, they were having a movie night, and she wanted to, kind of, unpack and try to get adjusted to her new apartment. So, at that point, we didn't think anything was, out of order or anything like that, because as my dad said, just prior to Unique coming up missing, about 2 weeks before Unique came up missing, I had broken my leg. So, in that 2-week time frame, Unique had been nursing me and helping me back. So that particular weekend, my dad had come to D.C. from North Carolina and tried to give her a break.
Wow. And what I was going to say about the apartments was, I remember about 15 years ago, I moved into, maybe a little better, but I believe it was about 15 years ago, I moved into my very first apartment. I was in my early 20s. And when I moved into that apartment, somebody tried to break in it like a week later. I had just started working for another police department, not the one that I work for now, but another one. Well, I did a history. I ended up doing a history on that address. The people that lived there before me had moved out because they had been broken into so many times. When I called the apartment manager and confronted her about that, when the maintenance man came over, he whispered to me, he said, "We're not supposed to say, we can't tell that or whatever, but this apartment had been broken in, the people had been burglarized. Not only that, but they came in here on the people that lived here before you, but we're not allowed, even the apartment managers aren't allowed to divulge that information." I think that could be changed, because I was a young mother with 2 small babies at the time. I think that definitely should be changed.
Yes.
Apartment complexes, the people that own these apartment complexes, not only that, but police departments need to make that available. See, I was able to see it because I worked there. I ran a history on it. But other people aren't really able to see that. You know what I mean? So I think that they should make that available to people before they work there. I know they're saying that if people knew this, if they knew that, they're not going to make money. But it's not just about money. It's about a person's life.
Exactly. You are so right. You are so right, Tamara, because even when I started going around there questioning people at the onset of this whole thing, the apartment realty company contacted me multiple times and told me that they did not want me around that apartment having visuals. they did not want me around there talking to their residents. So that let me know right there that it was something suspicious that they already knew before my daughter even moved into that apartment in the first place. And another aspect of this is that my dad, who can testify to it on the phone right now, tell him about her door or her apartment, Dad.
Well, the door, like they have the metal framing around these apartment doors.
Uh-huh.
You know that they have this little metal plank, I call it a plank, whatever it is, that the lock fits in. That was missing around the apartment door. And I told my granddaughter, I said, why would you move in the place like this? It looked like
that means somebody had already kicked the door in. So that means somebody had already kicked in the door and tampered with the door.
Right, that part that goes around the door, that the metal lip, what you can get separate with, I guess, with the door lock, that was missing from that apartment. That door, you could shake the whole door. The whole door you could shake.
Exactly.
And even nothing when you break in the apartment. It was nothing when you break in the apartment. The way it was.
And I think the way it looked after my dad brought it to my attention, I think that apartment door had already been kicked in or something anyway, because for it to be a metal door, it was very battered. To be a metal door. And when my dad brought that to my attention, I was like, wow, it just, how some things just, in hindsight, that's why they say hindsight is 20/20.
Right.
And even though we have spoke to her about this before, and my dad definitely made it perfectly clear to her, because if I'm not mistaken, didn't you ask Unique a couple of times, Dad, before this happened, if they had fixed that door?
Yeah, I asked her. But I told her she shouldn't even move in there, actually, before they fixed that door.
Before they fixed that door. They were supposed to fix that door before she even ever moved in there. Now, were you all able to find out who lived in that apartment before Unique? Because I'm sure they got a lot of history on that house. Because it could have been a case of mistaken identity.
That realty company would not release any information to inquire on that apartment. All they wanted me to do was shut up and go away.
That was nasty.
Wow.
They wouldn't give you no answer. People disappear and whatever. But I been several times looking to check to find out before I moved back up there to kick them out.
And one lady in the rental office had the nerve to get indignant with my dad for inquiring.
With me.
Wow.
She sure did. And she went there. Yeah, I say to went there. And she told me, and she had told me, and I know my granddaughter is, she was an easygoing person and a nice young lady. But this lady, for some reason, I could tell she did not like her. This lady went there to the complex. I don't know what's in now, but I can tell she did not like my daughter my granddaughter for some reason.
And I'm going to elaborate on that. I'm going to elaborate on that even further. After Unique came up missing, and I started really going through her documentation and her paperwork with a fine-tooth comb, Unique had, on this specific person that we're talking about, Unique had already drafted a letter of a complaint against this person for the way that she had been nasty to her when she came into the rental office requesting, things to be fixed in her apartment.
Wow. Wow, Miss Valencia, Mr. Harris, I'm gonna stop you all right there because we need to take a quick break.
Okay.
And we'll continue this and we'll be right back.
My name is Kimberly Houston, and I am a fair share giver. to the IBEW Johnny Dawson Charitable Foundation, and you can become a giver as well by visiting our website at www.johnnydawsonfoundation.org.
A blanket and Valentine's Day. We want you all to be our Valentine's.
Hey, my name is Marco Sanchez. I'm a first share giver to the IBW Johnny Dawson Charity Foundation.
My name is Glenda Hicks, and I am a fair share giver to the IBEW Johnny Dawson Charitable Foundation.
Hi, my name is Tommy Polian. I'm an above fair share giver to the IBEW Charitable Foundation. Giving back is everybody's responsibility in the community.
Hi, I'm Bill Hawkins, and I'm an above fair share giver to the IBEW Johnny Dawson Charitable Foundation.
Helping the community is everybody's responsibility. Welcome back to Real Talk with Tamara. On today's show, I've been speaking with Valencia Harris and Richard Harris. Valencia is the mother of Unique Harris, and Richard is the grandfather of Unique Harris. Unique went missing on 10/10/10, which was October 10th of 2010, under suspicious circumstances from Washington, D.C. Her parents have called in, where actually her mom and her grandfather, who was just like her father, has called in to spread awareness about her suspicious disappearance. Now, Valencia, when we left off, we was talking about the rental office and how I feel like the realty companies and even the rental offices, because most apartment complexes, I know here in Tennessee, they have a rental office on the grounds of the apartment complexes. They have a responsibility to give you history. It shouldn't be all about profits, you know. But especially when there is something that has happened prior in that apartment. Unique could have very well walked into a lion's den, moved into a lion's den, because we was talking about the situation as far as how the apartment looked. Like the door was not even, the door wasn't even fixed. They didn't even fix the door before she moved in. And then you and your father was talking about how nasty the lady at the rental office was in the apartments that she lived in. Now, when you all told her that Unique was missing, what did she say, Valencia?
Well, actually, the first initial conversation was between her and my dad. And when I found out she had gotten nasty and indignant with my dad, that's when I came into play. Because remember, my dad was trying to do a lot of this, going back and forth over there. I mean, my dad even went and climbed up in trash cans around there and everything, trying to see, you know, if he saw, you know, anything related to Unique. And when I finally did call her, she was pretty standoffish with me too, to the point where I had to go all the way up to her boss. Now, her boss came with a different, better attitude, but you still could feel an undercurrent of something that was unsavory.
Right. Now, you talked about the...
Her and I got into it as well, because she had even, you know, put a notice on Unique's door that Unique had owed them over $1,000 in rent.
Right.
How could you owe them over $1,000 worth of rent and you've only been in an apartment for 5 weeks? And I have Unique's receipts from her rent when she had paid them well over what she owed them.
And plus, didn't they say that was a mistake?
Yes, that's what the nasty ladies boss told me. That was an error that shouldn't have been put on her door. And my question to her was, how can you all put a notice on somebody's door saying that they owe you all in excess of $1,000 and it be a mistake? Especially in a situation now where my daughter is missing.
Okay, now this company, now is this a realty company that just rent out apartments to people?
It's a realty company. It's a larger realty company that owns multiple properties and rents out, you know, these apartments to people. But another twist to this story, Terry, is that shortly after Unique was taken, the realty company that was in place at that time, they sold the properties.
Wow. to try and probably avoid a lawsuit. Now, did you all have the opportunity to check the reputation of this realty company?
No, I didn't even know who the realty company was until I started doing my own investigations after he came up missing, and I was getting such a pushback from the rental office on the grounds. That's when, I let them know, okay, well, I'm not even going to deal with you all anymore because it sounds like you all are running me around Marguerite Bush. I need the realty company or whoever owns these apartments, I need their information. And that's when I connected with that realty company, which was Patriot Realty at the time. But they have sold the property. They didn't get out from under the property. They fired quite a few people that were like, right in this situation, and then they sold the property.
Oh wow, that's absolutely weird. Now you spoke about the first time we did an interview. You spoke about a maintenance man that was working for that realty company and the suspicious things that he stated. Yes. He let my dad into the apartment. He's the one that originally let my dad into the apartment. Right. So he got wind of what was going on, and my dad can elaborate to you on exactly what that conversation was about. Okay.
But when I walked into the apartment, I told him that particular morning that my granddaughter was missing. This was, was Monday morning. And I told him my granddaughter was missing. And I was still out looking for her. After I got to looking for her, I told him that in the apartment, we both was in the apartment, and he was standing more or less sort of behind me in the apartment. And it seemed like somebody had called him on the telephone. I don't know who it is, but whoever this person was, had needed some money. And he told him that, I ain't had no money right now, you ain't the phone out. And that was talking about all that went on in the apartment. And he was looking around. He was looking around the apartment. And so after I had let him go back to his bosses, I went around the complex and was looking myself to see whether I could come up with any clue, any type of clue, that particular Monday.
Wow. Now, Valencia, also, well, is it true that he made the statement, he tried to, because no one was even looking at this particular man at all, did he try to exonerate himself before questions were even asked to him?
Well,
when you run across him of mine, he was standing back behind me, like he was not standing right up, like toe to toe, face to face, and we could face each other. And it seemed to me like he was looking down at our circle, where our circle was cut.
Which is a very important clue in
my granddaughter's circle was cut. He was looking down at that, coming to pick up and there's a particular guy. I know how to point him out. If I see him again, I know exactly who he is.
Oh, we already got him in the radar anyway.
I already know who he is.
So her sofa, a unique sofa was cut?
And if I'm not sure, come to find out that this guy had a long history behind him.
Yes, indeed.
Did he have any history of
a long history behind him.
Was there any history of any sexual misconduct with women?
It was a violent conduct to which he had just recently, and I would say less than a month from Unique being taken, gotten out of jail.
Right.
Wow. And he already had a long violent history. Do you all know if those crimes were against women? A lot of them?
Yes, they were.
Okay. Lord have mercy.
He had a very, very violent history against women.
And that, yes, yes.
And in his relationships with women.
So let me ask you this: did this particular maintenance man, because I know like with a lot of like people that work on property, sometimes they have access to keys. Do you know if he would have had had access to her apartment?
That is your perfect question. I'm glad you asked that question, Tamara, because that is the perfect question, because I think I can attest to the fact that he came up to us during one prayer vigil. Remember that prayer vigil there when he came up to us?
Right.
And we were questioning him about certain things, and, you know, we kind of like had caught him off guard and backed him in a corner. And I said, well, there's certain things that were supposed to have been being done in my daughter's apartment, and I see some of the things were done. And at first, he tried to say that he didn't do them until we backed him in a corner. And I said, well, okay, well, who has access to these apartments? And he said that he specifically said, I am the only one that cuts the keys to the apartment, because nobody else here on staff knows how to cut the keys.
That's right. That's right.
So he could have easily, so even if the apartment complex tried to say, well, there was only one key, he could have easily cut another key. He was the only one that knew how to cut them.
Exactly. And those were his words. Those were his words. They told us.
Yes, right. That's what he said.
So the babies laid their sleep that night because her children were in the very next room. Do they remember anything? And how old were they at the time?
Well, Richard and Andre were 3 and 4 at the time, or 4 and 5 at the time. Yeah, they were like, because Richard is getting ready to turn 12, and her younger son is getting ready to turn 10 next month.
Right.
So they were like, like 4 and 5 at the time, 3 and 4, something like that at the time. They were very small.
So it would be hard for them to probably remember at that age a whole lot.
Yeah, and then they've been, you know, talked to and questioned by, you know, child forensic psychiatrists and psychologists as well. And, you know, whatever my grandsons told those psychiatrists and psychologists, according to the D.C. Police Department, that is, you know, information that they can't release. But there's been a few things that, you know, my grandsons have said to us since then that we jumped right on top of and given the information to the police. Because my oldest grandson made a statement probably about a year or two after Unique was taken, that he heard Unique arguing in the apartment with somebody, some male, arguing in the apartment with this male, and told this male that if they didn't get out of her apartment, she was going to call the police.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you think the children well, you don't have to tell me, did the baby, did your grandson know the person?
Say that again.
Did your grandson say that he knew the person? If you don't want to say, you don't have to.
He couldn't recognize the voice. That's right. What I say at this point. He couldn't at that point and at that juncture, he couldn't recognize the voice. Only thing that he could tell us was that it was a male voice.
Right.
Wow.
That's what puts me in the mindset that this is somebody that singly targeted Unique. One single person that targeted her. Because if there was multiple people that went up and took my daughter out of there, that was, you know, a big chance that they would have been taken, and, you know, I think we would have been further along in finding her.
Right.
If it was multiple people. But my grandson only heard one male voice.
One voice.
One voice that he heard.
Yeah.
Now, Unique was getting ready to go through a child custody case. Am I right?
She had already been in a child custody case back and forth with the children's father for 2 years before this happened. She had originally initiated her child custody and support case with the children's father in 2008 when they had separated. So that was like a 2-year-long battle that had been going on. And 2 weeks after Unique was taken, they actually had a court date for Richmond, Virginia, which is where Unique had moved from. She was supposed to have been going to a court date on October the 25th, which I found in her schedule and agenda book when I was going through her papers, you know, after the fact.
Oh, wow. So how vigilant has the kid's father been in trying to help you all to find out what has happened to Unique?
Yeah. Oh my God. Dad, you take care of that one because I don't know. She said, what is Richard and Andre's father been doing to try to help us to find Unique?
Nothing. Somebody said they were going to find her, but they ain't doing nothing about it.
And I've even offered for them to, even in Richmond where they live at, you know, you never know where you're going to find a lead to break this whole thing open. I even offered and asked them to at least just pass out flyers.
Yeah.
They don't want to help at all.
Yeah.
It's clear and apparent that they don't give two craps about my daughter being found. All they care about is getting their hands on those children to get a check.
And they have, yep.
So do they have the children?
Yeah, they have them. They fought me tooth and nail until, the court finally gave them to them.
And my mother stand up in that too.
Oh yeah. Him and his mother, they had to double barrel me. They knew they couldn't come at me single-handed.
Yeah.
Well, so I mean, now prior to Unique going missing, were they in the children's lives? Like,
No, she's asking that if the children's family, their father and their other grandmother were actively in their life helping Unique to support the boy.
No. And let me tell you one other thing that I know for a fact is my granddaughter was not a slouch with her boys. She loved it, them boys.
Yes.
If I don't say nothing else, I can tell you that I know that she loved it, them boys. And she took care of them boys. She had them boys going to seminars with the Jehovah people. On Saturday, I'm telling you what I know, not what I think.
Actually, it's about 2 or 3 days a week because once you found out that
she didn't believe in the boys.
Right, and once you found out that it was a bus that would transport her and her boys to church, that's when she started going more. And on the question of whether their dad was doing anything,
they weren't doing nothing.
Doing anything, me and my dad was helping Unique to support those boys.
So do you all find it suspicious that they weren't doing anything, but all of a sudden they're fighting, and they're not only are they fighting for the boys, but they fought you and took the boys. Not only that, but they won't try to help to find her?
Very suspicious. That's very suspicious. I mean, it's almost like, okay, now we got her out of the way.
Yeah.
And remember, I said it's almost like their mindset is, okay, now she's out the way, because another thing, Cameron, that I have to bring into this discussion also, he had been trying to fight my daughter for those boys for that whole 2 years, and my daughter was not turning her boys loose to him. She was not getting him. That's why she was still fighting him in court, because she did not want him to have access to those children. I mean, she had no problem with her boys seeing their dad, and she was trying to get him to be more active in their life. Right, and she was trying to get him to be more active in their life, but he chose not to came up missing.
He wanted to do what he wanted.
Now all of a sudden he's daddy daycare the year.
So,
Yeah.
so why do you think that he was fighting her? Did she file a suit for child support or something?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that.
He didn't want to pay any child support because he made a statement to my daughter that my daughter told me herself she doesn't need anything from him because the state can take care of her and the boys, or the state will take care of her and the boys. This is how trifling.
All he was looking for a free ride. He was looking for a free ride. Yeah.
Exactly.
All that.
Oh wow! Now, as far as his mother, because now, as far as his mother, was she active in the boys' life at all?
No, well, he wasn't active and she wasn't active. I mean, at the end of the day, she was siding with her son. At the end of the day, whatever her son wanted to do, that's what it was. She didn't care two craps about these boys either. I mean, anytime you're going to sit up, and I questioned her about this before, anytime you're going to sit up and watch and listen to your son sit up and call their mother explicit word in front of your face, and when my daughter says, well, do you see what he's doing? Anytime that mother says, well, if you're acting like that, he can call you that.
Oh wow!
Something is wrong with that picture, Tamara.
Yeah.
But some things you just don't do. You know what I'm saying? Because you're a human being and you treat people the way you want to be treated. And then when I approached her about it after he came up, listen, she tried to lie on my daughter that's missing and say that she never said that. Which I know that's a lie, because when Unique called me to tell me about Unique was so hurt and taken aback at the fact that she stood there and allowed her son to do that in Unique's house.
Yeah.
To her, in front of her boys, Unique was just like, she was livid. She was crying, she was upset, and she was like, well, Mom, how could that? I said, you don't worry about what other people say they will do as far as you're concerned. Your focus is supposed to always be your boys first and foremost. But she was, Unique was very hurt behind that. Very hurt.
Wow. Now, have they been? I know you say they have the boys now, and I know you all do a vigil for Unique every year. Do the boys attend?
Oh, they don't allow me any access to the boys at this point.
Did she ask them both of them is here? Yeah, for what we know, both of them is here.
No, she's talking about the vigils. Had they been allowed to come to the vigils? No, they don't even. Like I told you, Tamara, they're not lifting one finger to try to assist in finding these children's mother.
You know more about that because you're the one that's up and down with the vigils and whatever.
Exactly.
Since I'm away from
and you've been at quite a few of them.
Yeah.
And now those boys have not been to any vigils other than the first one or two that I had when this initially happened, when I still had custody of them. Once they came back to me for custody of those boys, no, those boys have not been, involved in anything, vigils or anything like that pertaining to my daughter.
Right.
And I just want to make this. I want to make this point, this clarification before I move on to my next thing about this case. But I can remember in the first interview when you told me that the kid's father was Unique and him were going back and forwards to court. They had a court date, and he claimed that he knew nothing about a case.
That's what he told me when I first found it in Unique's daily planner, her agenda schedule. He claimed, and I asked him about it, he claimed he didn't know anything about it. And I'm like, how can you not know when you have something on the docket at a court in reference to your children? How can you not know that? His version of the story to me was that he didn't know anything about it.
Wow.
Which is suspicious was all within itself.
Right. Now, how has the police helped the Washington D.C. Police Department? How helpful have they been in actively, continuously searching for Unique and keeping her case out there?
Well, at the end of the day, the terrorist is not going to accept them not doing anything. First and foremost, I just don't accept that. I don't accept we can't do it. I don't accept any excuses when it comes to Unique's case. Now, do I think at this juncture, if I wouldn't have been and still is not as, adamant and visual and tenacious about this as I am now, do you think, if you want to know if I think that they would have dropped the ball already, yes, they would have. Yes, they would have. But by them knowing Ms. Harris is not going to let this go, and I have no problem with going all the way up to the assistant chief, who's very helpful. Now, assistant chief of D.C. Police Department is wonderful. She is wonderful, and it's not one instance that I've had to deal with her on that she hasn't taken care of to my satisfaction. If I'm going to switch in from one detective to another detective, for example, one of the detectives on Unique's case never would call me back. When I did get him on the phone, he would tell me he would call me back at 3 o'clock, and here's 2 weeks later, and he hadn't called me back. The minute that I addressed that with the assistant chief of D.C. Police, Diane Groom, she took care of it. She got that detective off. She put another detective in, and she made sure, even after that process, that I was okay with how it went. And it was a matter of hours before she takes care of things. It's never a time when I contact Assistant Chief Groom that it takes her over 30 minutes to call. She always contacts me back within 30 minutes.
Wow.
So she's wonderful. It's just the people under her that's on my daughter's case directly that the problem is. Perfect example, the non-critical documentary I was doing with the American University students, and I can tell you right now, that documentary has done so well, and I'm so proud of it. It's winning awards all over here, and it won the Jury's Choice Award in France at the Cannes Film Festival. They tried to stop that from happening. The Director of Communications of the Metropolitan Police Department tried to deny that request.
Why do you think they don't want to cooperate? Why do you think that they don't want to cooperate when this is an active case?
Well, the excuse that she gave me was that they didn't want to project an image to the public that they were more concerned about African American cases.
Well, those are most of the cases that they got of missing persons, especially missing young women.
I wouldn't accept no for an answer. That's exactly why I wouldn't accept no for an answer, because it was a pitiful, poor excuse to me to not do what you all are supposed to do that help me to find my son.
It's chocolate.
When it comes to a situation like that, don't tell Ms. Harris, anything you need us to do, we're going to be here for you, and then try to shut me down when I'm doing another avenue to find my daughter. That's unacceptable to me. And at the end of the day, I want all of your listeners and viewers know Ms. Harris won that battle because the documentary got done anyway. And that's why I tell people out here now, just because you get no, you got to be willing to stand on a mountain of no's to get to that one yes. And just because the police tell you they can't do it, do not accept that. Because nobody's going to fight for your loved one like you are. These people don't know your loved one other than a case number. That's all they know about your loved one is a case number. None of these people even know my daughter.
And don't care to know.
So the police detectives aren't even that familiar? They're not even that familiar with her case?
Well, they should be, but then I think I've made it pretty familiar with certain ones of them now. But, you know, there are still officers and detectives and things that have no clue as to who Unique Harris is. And how is that if this child has been missing for almost 6 years?
And nobody knows nothing. They find out what they want to find out.
Exactly.
They don't want what they don't want to find out. They don't want about it.
That's one thing. If it was one of their children, every person in the Metropolitan Police Department would know about it and be on the lookout for information on that person.
I will say this. I will say this because we're coming to the end, and I'm gonna give you all the opportunity to speak. But I will say this: I find it appalling that so many police departments care more about how they look rather than the actual cases. Mr. Harris, what do you think has happened to your daughter, your granddaughter, and what would you like to see happen?
I would like to, first of all, to thank all of you all for being so nice and prompt with this message. But I also would like for my granddaughter, to know that she was loved, that she'll always be loved, and I would love for somebody to find her.
And come forward with some information. Anybody has some information on what's happening?
I to bring her back to her people, to her loved one.
Yes, yes.
That's what I pray for.
Yeah.
Wow, that's so.
And I will add to that, Tamara, and say, you know, my dad has had, you know, some health issues that have, you know, happened to him. You know, he had a stroke back the beginning of last year, and by pure grace, love and mercy of God, my dad has come back almost 100%. I mean, he has no paralysis or anything, and I think a direct cause of this is his worriation for his granddaughter, because him and Unique have been very close all of her life. She would talk to my dad before she would even talk to me, and what I would like is, you know, first of all, for the police departments to start taking these cases more seriously. Because you can't classify a person as non-critical missing if they're missing, for number one. I think that situation needs to be taken out of the equation. And as far as what I think happened to my daughter, I think that somebody within that complex or within, you know, some people that she had met in her most recent, you know, small time frame that she was back in D.C., got a look at my daughter and they targeted her. Well, what they targeted her for, whether it was, you know, sex trafficking, human trafficking, or to shut her up because, you know, she had a murder that happened outside of her apartment window, I think probably about a week before she came up missing. So I would like to know, and I would really, really appreciate anyone that has any information on what happened to my daughter to please come forward, because today it's me, tomorrow it could very well be you.
Right, so someone was murdered outside of her window. She witnessed that a week before she went missing?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And she called me and she was crying and she was irate and she was like, "Oh my God, Mom, somebody just got killed." And I was like, "Well, where are you?" She was like, "I'm looking out the window." I said, "Get away from the window. Get away from the window." The only thing I could think to tell her over the phone, and as upset as she was to get away from the window. Now, whether that has a direct link to what happened to my daughter or the scenario with the complex itself and its employees, that's the big mystery right now. But two things for certain and one thing for sure, the church is not going to stop until she either finds Unique or she dies trying to find Unique. Plain, simple, end of story. And I think you already know that very well, Carol.
I definitely know that very well. You've been very vigilant and vocal about your daughter's disappearance, and not only that, but you've been very vigilant in bringing awareness to missing persons as it relates to not just all women, but especially black women, because we know that whenever someone goes missing or whatever happens to someone of any race, they're important. But it seems to be happening to African American women more. They seem to be a target, and I've always said this because I know it to be true. They are a target because nobody really cares. They don't get the coverage in the media as a Natalie Hollowell would. Natalie Hollowell went missing over in another country, and she's getting the media coverage over here. You see what I mean? So our girls don't get that kind of attention.
Isn't that something? I mean, that whole Chandra Levy trial for the guy that they say murdered her took precedent. The trial, not the initial phases of her disappearance, but the trial took all the media coverage that my daughter could have had that first
Right.
that she missed.
Right. But then they show they don't care. They care about somebody that they consider as impossible. And that things like that don't supposed to happen to them.
Right, the media,
They don't care nothing about you.
right, the media picks and chooses. They pick and choose who they feel is important, and unfortunately, people of color aren't important in the media, because even when something happens to them, they turn around and brainwash the people by making them think that they deserved it by they were on drugs, they were doing this, they was doing that. The media is able to brainwash a lot of people and make them think a certain way. I know that. A lot of the things that they put in the media is not even true. That's the reason why I work for a police department here in Tennessee, and I don't even look at the news because I know it's not true. Nothing they put on there, that it's a lot of propaganda, a lot of it, and they embellish a whole lot.
I know.
I look at the news and I'm like, that's not what happened. But hey, you know, that's why I say we have to be vigilant and vigilant because we can control a whole lot of stuff if we don't spend our funds with a whole lot of people. That'll make them do right.
That's correct. But we have to do it ourselves. Okay?
We have to do it ourselves. We have to do it ourselves. We worry about the wrong things.
Don't be dependent on nobody else. Don't be dependent on nobody else. You got to do it yourself.
Absolutely. We have to do it ourselves. I say all the time, we worry about the wrong things. We got girls like Unique coming up missing left and right. The only thing that we can be concerned about is how much somebody's weave costs, or something that ain't got nothing to do with nothing other than demanding that our kids be put on TV when they're missing and they get the same coverage. Now that's being proactive.
Exactly. And that's one of the reasons, Tamara, why you are such a valuable, priceless asset to us. Because you keep attention on these things. You are using your platform to not talk about it, but to be about it. And I, number one, personally, and I'm sure my dad will agree with me on this, we love and we appreciate you, sweetheart, for everything that you do.
To the utmost. To the utmost.
Thank you, and I love you too.
But you fighting tremendous odds.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, and I love you too. I love your fight. I love your fire. I love what you're doing. I love that you use your platform. I love it that you just don't stop. You don't let people tell you no. If we had more people like you, we could get a whole lot of things changed.
Amen.
We could get a whole lot of things changed if we had a whole lot of people like you. So I'm going to continue to fight with you. Whenever you need me, I'm here.
I know.
Okay.
Thank you so much. You have said that to me from the beginning of our relationship, and you have done nothing but show me that you are a woman of God and you are a woman of your word. And for that, I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. And I want to thank you all for calling in, and thank you all for tuning in to Real Talk with Tamara here on Tamara's Productions TV Network, Comcast Channel 31. Until next time, God bless us all.